There's a conversation happening inside your mind right now that you're probably not even aware of. It's not the voice of your rational adult self, the one that makes decisions and navigates daily life. This is something deeper, more primal, more desperate for your attention than anything else in your psychological landscape. It's the voice of a child who never truly grew up, who remains frozen in time within the darkest corners of your unconscious mind, still carrying wounds from decades ago as if they happened yesterday. Carl Jung discovered something that modern neuroscience has now confirmed through brain imaging studies. Our earliest experiences don't simply fade into memory, they become the operating system of our adult minds. Dr. Bruce Perry's research at the Child Trauma Academy reveals that childhood experiences literally sculpt neural pathways, creating automatic responses that govern how we react to stress, intimacy, success, and failure for the rest of our lives. But here's what most people don't understand about inner child healing. It's not enough to simply acknowledge that your past affects your present. The real transformation happens when you learn to identify and integrate what Jung called your shadow, the repository of all the parts of yourself that you learned were unacceptable, dangerous, or shameful. Your inner child doesn't just live in your conscious memories. They live primarily in your shadow, influencing every relationship you form, every decision you make, and every emotional reaction you have. Today, we're going to explore something that could fundamentally change how you understand your own mind. We're going to discover why mastering your shadow isn't just about psychological healing. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that contain your greatest power, your deepest wisdom, and your most authentic capacity for joy and creativity. The wounded child within you isn't just seeking comfort. They're guarding treasures that could transform your entire life if you have the courage to venture into the darkness and bring them home. When you learn to dialogue with your shadow, when you understand the language of your wounded inner child, you don't just heal old pain. You unlock access to emotional intelligence, creative inspiration, and authentic presence that most people never experience. You stop being controlled by unconscious patterns and start becoming the conscious architect of your own emotional reality. Deep within the labyrinth of your nervous system lies a story that began before you could speak, before you could even understand what was happening to you. Modern neuroscience has revealed that the developing brain is exquisitely sensitive to emotional attunement, with neural networks forming based on whether a child's world feels safe or threatening, predictable or chaotic, loving or rejecting. Dr. Dan Siegel's research on interpersonal neurobiology shows that when children experience chronic stress, trauma, or emotional neglect, it fundamentally alters brain development. The right hemisphere, which processes emotions, creativity, and intuitive knowing, can become underdeveloped or dysregulated. Meanwhile, the left hemisphere, focused on logic and survival strategies, becomes hyperactive as the child learns to intellectualize their way through an emotionally dangerous world. This neurobiological split creates what Jung recognized as the fundamental structure of psychological wounding, the development of a false self that can function in the world while the authentic self, the inner child with all their natural emotions, needs, and spontaneous responses, gets pushed into the unconscious shadow. The child doesn't consciously choose this split. Their developing nervous system creates it as a brilliant survival adaptation. Recent studies in epigenetics by Dr. Rachel Yehuda have shown that traumatic experiences can actually alter gene expression, and these changes can be passed down through generations. This means you might be carrying not only your own childhood wounds, but also the unprocessed pain of your parents and grandparents, creating layers of shadow material that influence your behavior in ways you've never consciously considered. The inner child in your shadow isn't just holding memories of what happened to you. They're holding the full emotional truth of your early experiences. They carry your unexpressed rage at being misunderstood, your grief over love that felt conditional, your terror of abandonment, and your deep longing for someone to finally see and accept all of who you are. But they also carry your natural creativity, your capacity for wonder, your authentic emotional responses, and your innate wisdom about what you need to feel safe and loved. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking research on trauma reveals that these early experiences become stored as implicit memories, bodily felt sensations and emotional states that can be triggered in adulthood without any conscious understanding of their origin. This is why you might find yourself having intense emotional reactions that seem completely disproportionate to current circumstances. Your inner child is responding to something that feels familiar, something that echoes the original wounding experience. Understanding this neurobiological foundation is crucial because it helps you recognize that your emotional reactions aren't character flaws or signs of weakness. They're the natural result of a developing nervous system that adapted to protect you from overwhelming experiences. The same sensitivity that made you vulnerable to wounding also gives you the capacity for deep empathy, emotional intelligence, and authentic connection when it's consciously integrated rather than unconsciously suppressed. Jung understood that the human psyche has an incredible capacity for self-protection, even when that protection comes at great cost. When a child's authentic emotional responses consistently meet with rejection, punishment, or abandonment, the psyche creates what he called complexes, autonomous clusters of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that operate independently of conscious control. Think of complexes as internal subpersonalities, each carrying their own agenda and their own version of reality. The good child complex might drive perfectionism and people-pleasing, desperately trying to earn love through performance. The invisible child complex might create patterns of self-minimization and chronic self-doubt. The angry child complex might carry all the rage that was never safe to express, erupting unexpectedly in adult relationships when triggered. Modern psychology has validated Jung's insights through research on dissociation and internal family systems. Dr. Richard Schwartz's work reveals that everyone has multiple parts within their psyche, and healing involves developing a loving, curious relationship with these different aspects of self, rather than trying to eliminate or control them. The tragedy of childhood wounding is that the very qualities that make a child most lovable, their spontaneity, their emotional honesty, their natural need for connection and attention, are often the qualities that get pushed into the shadow when the environment can't tolerate them. The sensitive child learns to hide their sensitivity. The joyful child learns to contain their exuberance. The questioning child learns to stop asking for what they need. This splitting doesn't just affect childhood, it creates the template for all future relationships. The adult who learned that their anger was dangerous might find themselves unable to set healthy boundaries. The one who learned that their sadness was a burden might struggle to ask for support when they need it. The one who learned that their excitement was too much might find themselves chronically depressed, cut off from their own life force. Dr. Alice Miller's research on narcissistic wounding shows how children can develop what she calls a false self structure, a carefully constructed personality designed to meet others' needs while remaining disconnected from their own authentic experience. This false self can be highly functional and even successful in worldly terms, but it leaves the person feeling empty, exhausted, and profoundly alone. The shadow doesn't just contain the wounded aspects of the inner child. It also contains what Jung called the unlived life, all the potential that was sacrificed for safety and acceptance. The artist who became an accountant to please their parents, the natural leader who learned to follow to avoid conflict, the deeply empathetic person who became logical and detached to protect themselves from feeling too much. These unlived aspects don't disappear. They continue to exert their influence from the unconscious, creating what Jung called symptoms that are actually the psyche's attempt to restore balance and wholeness. Depression might be the soul's refusal to continue living inauthentically. Anxiety might be the nervous system's way of signaling that something essential is missing. Relationship patterns might be unconscious attempts to heal old wounds by recreating familiar dynamics and trying to make them turn out differently. Your shadow doesn't speak in words the way your conscious mind does. It communicates through symptoms, through patterns, through the repetitive cycles that you can't seem to break no matter how much you understand them intellectually. Learning to recognize and interpret this shadow language is essential for inner child healing because it's how your wounded child is trying to get your attention. Jung observed that the shadow often communicates through what he called projections, unconsciously seeing in others the qualities we've rejected in ourselves. The person who irritates you most intensely is often carrying a trait that you've pushed into your own shadow. The colleague whose emotional neediness triggers your judgment might be reflecting your own unacknowledged need for care and attention. The partner whose anger seems so destructive might be mirroring the rage you've never allowed yourself to feel. Dr. Harville Hendricks's research on relationships reveals that we're unconsciously attracted to people who carry both the positive and negative traits of our primary caregivers. This isn't coincidence. It's the psyche's attempt to complete unfinished emotional business from childhood. Your current relationship conflicts are often your inner child's way of trying to resolve dynamics that couldn't be worked through in your family of origin. Dreams provide another crucial channel for shadow communication. Jung saw dreams as direct messages from the unconscious, and inner child dreams often involve themes of being lost, searching for home, or encountering younger versions of yourself. The child who appears in your dreams isn't just a symbol. They're a living aspect of your psyche that's trying to communicate something important about what's missing from your conscious life. Physical symptoms also carry shadow messages. Chronic tension in your shoulders might be your inner child carrying the weight of responsibilities that were never theirs to bear. Digestive issues might reflect your system's inability to stomach certain emotions or experiences. Autoimmune conditions might represent your inner warrior turning against itself because it was never allowed to fight the real threats in your environment. Emotional reactions that seem disproportionate to current circumstances are perhaps the most direct form of shadow communication. When someone's casual comment triggers hours of self-doubt, when a minor conflict sends you into emotional shutdown, when success brings unexpected anxiety instead of joy, these reactions are your inner child communicating through the only language they know, the emotional logic of their original wounding experience. Research by Dr. Gabor Mate on the connection between trauma and illness shows that many physical and mental health symptoms are actually adaptive responses to impossible emotional situations. The child who couldn't fight or flee from threatening circumstances might develop chronic fatigue as an adult. The one who learned that their emotions caused others to withdraw might develop anxiety disorders as their nervous system remains hypervigilant to signs of rejection. Learning to dialogue with your shadow requires developing what Jung called active imagination, the conscious engagement with unconscious contents through visualization, journaling, or creative expression. When you feel triggered by someone or something, instead of immediately trying to fix or analyze the reaction, you can ask your inner child, "What are you trying to tell me right now? What do you need me to understand?" This isn't about regression or wallowing in childhood pain. It's about developing a mature, loving relationship with the wounded aspects of your psyche, so they can finally feel heard and begin to trust that you're capable of protecting and caring for them in ways that weren't available during your actual childhood. Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who you think you should be, requires what he called the union of opposites. For inner child healing, this means learning to hold both your wounded and your wise aspects, your vulnerable and your strong parts, your need for safety and your desire for growth, without having to choose one over the other. This integration process begins with what Dr. Kristin Neff calls self-compassion, the ability to relate to your own suffering with the same kindness you would offer to a beloved friend. Most people have learned to respond to their inner child's pain with criticism, dismissal, or attempts at rational problem-solving. But wounded children don't need logic. They need love, validation, and the experience of being truly seen and accepted. Modern research on neuroplasticity shows that self-compassion literally rewires the brain, strengthening neural pathways associated with emotional regulation, resilience, and secure attachment. Dr. Paul Gilbert's work on compassion-focused therapy reveals that when we learn to activate our caregiving system toward ourselves, it helps regulate the threat detection system that keeps us hypervigilant and defensive. The integration process often involves what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to feel painful emotions fully without immediately trying to escape, fix, or transcend them. This doesn't mean wallowing or becoming masochistic. It means developing the capacity to be present with difficult feelings while maintaining enough awareness to learn from them and eventually transform them. Dr. Peter Levine's somatic experiencing work shows that trauma healing often requires helping the nervous system complete defensive responses that were interrupted during the original overwhelming experience. Your inner child might need to express anger that was never safe to feel, or tears that were never allowed to flow, or needs that were never permitted to be spoken. Creating safe spaces for these natural responses to complete themselves is often more healing than any amount of cognitive understanding. Integration also requires what Jung called withdrawing projections, recognizing when you're seeing your own disowned qualities in other people, and taking responsibility for reclaiming those aspects of yourself. This isn't about becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It's about developing a more honest and complete relationship with all aspects of your personality. As you learn to accept the parts of yourself you've been fighting, something remarkable happens. The energy that was tied up in maintaining internal conflicts becomes available for creativity, for genuine intimacy, for pursuing goals that align with your authentic values rather than just meeting external expectations. You begin to experience what Jung called psychological wholeness, not perfection but completeness. This wholeness allows you to respond to life's challenges from a place of internal resourcefulness rather than unconscious reactivity. You can feel anger without being consumed by it, experience sadness without being overwhelmed, face fear without being paralyzed. You develop what trauma therapists call emotional regulation, not the suppression of feelings, but the capacity to feel them fully while maintaining choice about how you respond. The integrated person doesn't eliminate their inner child or transcend their shadow. They develop a conscious, loving relationship with all aspects of themselves. They become what Jung called individuated, whole persons who can access different parts of their psyche as circumstances require, without being controlled by unconscious patterns or defensive reactions. One of the most profound discoveries in shadow work is that many of the qualities we've pushed into the unconscious aren't weaknesses or flaws. They're actually our greatest strengths in disguise. The sensitivity you learn to hide might be your superpower for reading energy and understanding others' needs. The anger you've suppressed might contain your capacity for healthy boundaries and social justice. The neediness you've been ashamed of might be your natural drive for connection and intimacy. Jung understood that the shadow contains not only our wounds, but also our gold, the disowned aspects of our personality that could make us most powerful and authentic if we had the courage to reclaim them. The child who was told they were too much might actually possess an extraordinary capacity for enthusiasm and leadership. The one who was labeled too sensitive might have natural gifts for healing and empathy that the world desperately needs. Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, in her work on the wild nature of women, describes how many people have learned to domesticate themselves so thoroughly that they've lost touch with their natural instincts, their creative fire, and their authentic responses to life. Reclaiming your shadow often means becoming wilder in the best sense, more honest, more spontaneous, more willing to trust your inner knowing even when it doesn't match social expectations. This process requires tremendous courage because it means risking the disapproval of others, including the internalized voices of your own family and culture. The person who begins to set boundaries might be accused of being selfish. The one who starts expressing their authentic emotions might be told they're being dramatic. The one who pursues their real dreams might face criticism for being impractical or unrealistic. But Jung believed that this courage to individuate, to become who you truly are, is not only personally necessary, but socially essential. A world full of people living from their false selves creates collective neurosis, projection, and conflict. When individuals do their own shadow work, they stop unconsciously dumping their disowned material onto others and start contributing to collective healing and wisdom. Research by Dr. Brené Brown on vulnerability and shame reveals that people who are willing to be authentic about their struggles and imperfections actually create deeper connections and have more influence than those who try to maintain a perfect image. Authenticity, it turns out, is magnetic in ways that performance never can be. Reclaiming your power often involves grieving the years spent living from your false self, the opportunities missed while you were trying to be someone else, the relationships that couldn't reach their full depth because you were afraid to be truly seen. This grief is not self-pity. It's a necessary part of releasing the past and making space for a more authentic way of being. As you integrate your shadow and heal your inner child, you often discover that you have natural talents and interests that were buried under layers of conditioning and adaptation. The accountant might rediscover their love of painting. The people-pleaser might find their voice as an advocate for justice. The perfectionist might learn to embrace the beautiful messiness of being human. This reclamation isn't about becoming someone new, it's about becoming more fully yourself. Jung called this the self with a capital S, the archetype of wholeness that serves as the organizing principle of the psyche. When you're connected to yourself, you make decisions from inner authority rather than external approval. You create from authentic inspiration rather than obligation, and you love from fullness rather than emptiness. When you begin to heal your relationship with your own inner child, the transformation extends far beyond your personal experience. Your nervous system becomes more regulated, which affects everyone around you. Your capacity for presence increases, which enhances the quality of all your relationships. Your authenticity gives others permission to be real, creating ripple effects of healing that can span generations. Research on attachment by Dr. Mary Main shows that parents who have processed their own childhood experiences tend to raise children with secure attachment, regardless of what they themselves experienced as children. This means that your commitment to healing your inner child isn't just personal therapy. It's a contribution to breaking cycles of intergenerational trauma and creating healthier family systems. Children are particularly sensitive to authenticity. They can sense when adults are operating from their true selves versus their adaptive personas. When you're connected to your own inner child, you naturally know how to relate to children in ways that support their authentic development, rather than forcing them to adapt prematurely to adult expectations. Romantic relationships transform profoundly when both partners are doing their inner child work. Instead of unconsciously trying to heal their childhood wounds through each other, they can offer support from a place of wholeness rather than neediness. Conflicts become opportunities for deeper understanding rather than reenactments of old family dramas. Professional life often shifts as well. The person who has integrated their shadow and healed their inner child tends to be more creative, more collaborative, and more emotionally intelligent. They're less likely to be triggered by workplace conflicts and more likely to contribute solutions that consider both practical and human factors. Dr. Joanna Macy's work on The Great Turning describes how individual psychological healing and planetary healing are intimately connected. The same patterns that create personal suffering, disconnection, denial, the suppression of natural responses, are at work on a collective level in how humanity relates to environmental destruction, social injustice, and global conflict. When you heal these patterns within yourself, you develop capacities that are desperately needed for collective transformation. Shadow work also contributes to what Jung called the evolution of consciousness. Every person who chooses awareness over unconsciousness, integration over fragmentation, love over fear, makes it easier for others to make the same choice. Your willingness to face your own darkness with courage and compassion becomes a beacon of possibility for others who are struggling with their own shadows. This doesn't mean you become responsible for healing others, or that you should try to teach or fix people. Often, the most powerful way you can contribute to collective healing is simply by living authentically, by modeling what it looks like to be a whole person who has learned to hold both light and shadow with equal love. As more people do this work, we move toward what Jung envisioned as a more conscious, compassionate world, not one without problems or conflicts, but one where people relate to each other from awareness rather than unconscious projection, from curiosity rather than judgment, from love rather than fear. Shadow work and inner child healing aren't destinations you reach through a single breakthrough. They're ongoing practices that require consistent, gentle attention. Jung emphasized that psychological transformation happens through what he called daily work, small, conscious choices that gradually shift your relationship with unconscious patterns and allow for greater integration and wholeness. One of the most powerful practices involves developing what mindfulness teachers call emotional granularity, the ability to identify and name specific emotions rather than defaulting to broad categories like fine, stressed, or upset. Your inner child communicates through nuanced emotional states, and learning their language requires developing precision in emotional awareness. Each morning, you might spend a few minutes checking in with your internal landscape, asking, "What am I feeling right now? What does my inner child need today?" This isn't about changing anything immediately. It's about developing the habit of internal attunement that most people lost in childhood, when they learn to prioritize others' needs over their own awareness. Journaling becomes a form of dialogue when approached from a shadow work perspective. Instead of just recording events, you can write letters to your inner child, asking what they want you to know, what they need from you, how they're feeling about current situations in your life. Many people are surprised to discover that their inner child has clear opinions, preferences, and wisdom that their adult mind has been overlooking. Dream work offers another pathway into shadow material. Jung believed that dreams were direct communications from the unconscious, and keeping a dream journal can help you track patterns and themes that reveal what your psyche is trying to integrate. You don't need to interpret every symbol. Simply paying attention and asking, "What is my unconscious trying to tell me?" creates a bridge between conscious and unconscious awareness. Active imagination, one of Jung's most powerful techniques, involves consciously engaging with images, figures, or scenarios that arise from your unconscious. You might visualize having a conversation with a younger version of yourself, or imagine dialoguing with the part of you that feels angry, scared, or ashamed. This isn't fantasy or escapism. It's a way of creating conscious relationship with aspects of your psyche that usually operate autonomously. Body-based practices are essential because trauma and emotional wounding are stored somatically, not just psychologically. This might involve breathwork, movement, yoga, or simply learning to notice how different emotions feel in your body. Your inner child speaks through physical sensations as much as through thoughts or images. Creative expression becomes medicine when approached as shadow work. Drawing, painting, writing, dancing, singing, any form of creative expression that bypasses the rational mind can help unconscious material surface and integrate. The goal isn't to create good art, but to give your inner world a voice and form. Setting boundaries in relationships becomes a practice of honoring your inner child's needs and limits. This might mean saying no to requests that drain your energy, speaking up when something doesn't feel right, or asking for what you need even when it feels vulnerable. Each conscious boundary choice helps your inner child trust that you're finally willing to protect them. Reparenting practices involve consciously giving yourself experiences that your inner child needed but didn't receive. This might mean celebrating small victories, comforting yourself when you're disappointed, or creating rituals that honor your growth and healing. The goal is to become the loving, attuned parent to yourself that you needed when you were young. Self-compassion becomes the foundation that allows all other practices to be effective. Dr. Kristin Neff's research shows that self-compassion has 3 components: treating yourself with kindness when you're struggling, recognizing that suffering is part of the human experience, and maintaining mindful awareness of your experience without getting overwhelmed by it. As you continue this journey of shadow integration and inner child healing, something remarkable begins to happen. The experiences that once felt like evidence of your brokenness or inadequacy start to reveal themselves as sources of wisdom, compassion, and authentic strength. This isn't about romanticizing pain or believing that suffering is necessary for growth. It's about recognizing that your wounds, when consciously engaged, become gateways to understanding yourself and others more deeply. Jung understood that what he called the wounded healer archetype appears in every culture throughout history. The recognition that those who have navigated their own darkness often become most capable of helping others find their way. Your sensitivity to rejection might give you extraordinary empathy for others who feel like outsiders. Your experience with anxiety might help you understand the human nervous system in ways that could benefit countless people. Your struggles with self-worth might ultimately lead you to insights about authentic value that transform not only your own life, but inspire others to question their own self-limiting beliefs. This transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to stay present with difficult experiences long enough to extract their teachings rather than just escaping or numbing the pain. It means asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" instead of just, "How can I make this stop?" Dr. Richard Tedeschi's research on post-traumatic growth shows that many people report significant positive changes following difficult experiences, including increased appreciation for life, deeper relationships, greater personal strength, and enhanced spiritual development. These changes don't happen despite the suffering, but through conscious engagement with it. As you integrate your shadow and heal your inner child, you often discover that your greatest struggles have prepared you for your most meaningful contributions. The person who learned to navigate family chaos might become skilled at bringing calm to conflict situations. The one who felt invisible as a child might develop exceptional ability to see and validate others. The one who experienced betrayal might become a powerful advocate for truth and authenticity. This doesn't mean that all suffering has a purpose or that trauma is beneficial. It means that human beings have an extraordinary capacity to transform even the most difficult experiences into sources of wisdom, strength, and service when they're met with consciousness rather than denial. The integration process also reveals that many of the coping strategies you developed as a child, while perhaps limiting in adult life, were actually brilliant adaptations to impossible circumstances. The perfectionism that exhausts you now might have been how you tried to earn love when nothing else seemed to work. The people-pleasing that drains your energy might have been your way of creating safety in an unpredictable environment. Recognizing the intelligence and creativity of your childhood survival strategies helps you appreciate them even as you outgrow them. Jung believed that the ultimate goal of psychological development isn't to eliminate suffering, but to develop the capacity to suffer consciously, to feel pain fully without being destroyed by it, to face difficulty without losing hope, to experience loss without closing your heart. This mature relationship with suffering becomes a form of spiritual practice that connects you to the deeper currents of human experience. When you can be present with your own pain without being overwhelmed, you naturally develop greater capacity to be present with others' suffering as well. You become what Buddhists call a bodhisattva, someone who has touched their own liberation but chooses to remain engaged with the world's pain in service of collective awakening. Your healing journey becomes a gift, not only to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. The child who finally feels seen and accepted within you radiates a quality of presence that gives other wounded children, in adult bodies, permission to hope that healing is possible. Your willingness to be authentic about your struggles and your growth creates ripples of possibility that extend far beyond what you can measure or control. This is how individual shadow work becomes collective healing. This is how healing your inner child contributes to the healing of the world. Every moment you choose consciousness over unconsciousness, love over fear, integration over fragmentation, you participate in what Jung called the evolution of human consciousness. Your shadow was never your enemy. Your inner child was never a burden to overcome. They were always guardians of your most authentic power, waiting patiently for you to develop the courage and wisdom necessary to welcome them home. The darkness you've been avoiding contains the very light you've been seeking. The wounds you've been trying to heal hold the keys to the wholeness you've been longing for. Mastering your shadow doesn't mean controlling it or transcending it. It means developing a conscious, loving relationship with all aspects of yourself, the light and the dark, the wounded and the wise, the child and the adult. When you can hold this complexity with compassion, when you can embrace your full humanity without apology, you become truly free. Not free from the human experience, but free within it. Free to love deeply, create authentically, and contribute meaningfully to the healing of our shared world. The journey into your shadow is ultimately a journey home, home to yourself, home to wholeness, home to the truth of who you've always been beneath the layers of adaptation and protection. Your inner child has been waiting for this homecoming. Your authentic self has been calling you back to this integration. The time is now. The door is open. The only question is whether you're ready to step through it into the fullness of who you truly are.